Welcome to Conversations. I'm Jeff DeForest. Very happy to inaugurate the program here on Bleacher Brothers. And wow, I mean, this is something I've wanted to do for a long, long time. I was in radio here in South Florida for over 40 years. And the last gig I had, I remember an early meeting with the program director, a guy named Ken Charles. And this is when they had just changed the rating systems in radio, and they had gotten rid of the diaries and brought in the people meters that people were wearing little wristwatches, and that they happened to be in an elevator where they were playing zombie music. That's what registered. You would have the beautiful light music station show up, and it sounded like they were listening for hours if they were stuck in there. And he attached a lot of importance to this, and I remember him telling me, "Listen, DeForest, you're not going to be able to do what you used to do because no interview should be more than 3 minutes." And I thought, you have to be kidding me. I can't even say my name in 3 minutes. And so I ended up defying all of that. And for a long time, was looking for a platform where we could just talk to people and have, as we say, conversations. And I would have to say, and let me introduce our inaugural guest on the program, the lovely and talented one, as she's known, Lesley Visser, who had a hell of a day and a hell of a time trying to get here. As you were in New York earlier this morning after receiving are there any awards that you haven't received in your lifetime, Lesley Visser? And thank you so much. You're my NASA person. Every time I launch a new project, whether it succeeds or not, you're always the first person I go to. So thank you so much for doing this, and welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
You know what, Defoe, you're going to be so great at this. I don't know if this will rival when you stuff yourself at lunch and you get paid for that. I don't know what sort of boondoggle thing you have going there. You and Mayo go to lunch, stuff
Yes.
yourself, and you get paid. But this is so natural for you. You're like the greatest conversationalist. You know everything. Wait, they were playing Time of the Season, the Zombies? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out a description for elevator music, and it would be like on WLYF or something like that, and they would end up at the top of the ratings, and you would be down there at the bottom, but with your sports talk shows. And the other thing that always bothered me about sports talk and its evolution, as much as I love doing it, was it became, and it's really evolved into just one argument after another. And so the idea of having conversations was kind of lost. So we're hoping to bring a little of that back with the people that we have on the show. And so grateful that you were able to do this for us. Uh, the Vin Scully Award, I mean, did you have to start the speech that you gave in acceptance with pull up a chair and stay a while? How was that?
I
And
started it with his family was there. So for your viewers or listeners, so yes, last night I became the first woman to win the Vin Scully Award, which went to all our favorites. Al Michaels won it, Dick Enberg, Bob Costas, Brent Musburger. So it was. I did about maybe I've done probably 10 World Series between the Boston Globe and but one on CBS, a couple on CBS, a couple on ABC, and I got to know him, a little bit, and it's weird to say had a lot in common, but we're both Jesuit educated. He went to Fordham. They're the ones who actually gave the award at their Lincoln Center campus and Boston College. And he always had a book, but his family was there last night, his daughters. And I said, I used to get to go to breakfast with him once in a while, and to hear that voice, coming across the breakfast table, we'll have another coffee. So, but the amazing thing, as I said in my speech, is that lest everyone doesn't know about Vin Scully's background, and I sort of tell me if this was a little bit of a leap of faith. Okay, so do you know what his first professional broadcast was ever?
Fordham University Junior Varsity Volleyball.
No, as a professional.
Pro wrestling. No, I don't.
Okay, as I, you know, shared with the audience, that his very first assignment, he got out of Fordham in the spring of 49. His first assignment was in the fall of 49. And where was it from? It was not Welcome to Dodger Baseball. It was at Fenway Park. That's right, Fenway Park. Now, admittedly, it was not baseball. It was a BU Maryland football game, and he thought it would be indoors, like in the press box, but it wasn't. It was on the roof, and the poor guy, we almost lost him. He like froze his fingers off. And then I said, he worked. Do you know he was the one who called Dwight Clark's catch in the '81 AFC Championship, where for CBS? So I mean, the Dodgers weren't it for him; it was CBS.
Well, he was great. I had a chance to deal with him quite a bit. I met him when I was, at the lowest level of journalism, the Fontana Herald News, outside of Los Angeles, my first job.
What'd you
And
call it? Remember, you used to have a slogan for it?
yes, it was yesterday's news tomorrow. That's how it started. And I remember, he was great. The Dodger organization was, just exuding class back in those days. I guess that was true maybe of a lot of sporting organizations. I don't know how much that has changed. We can get into that a little bit later on. But meeting Vin Scully, he was just as dignified and classy, very much like one of my other favorites, who. Of course, I send you every now and then a clip of the guy, Jimmy Lennon Sr., the great ring announcer from the Olympic Auditorium. And when you met Vin Scully, you were thinking, geez, I want to treat people just like this guy does, as high of a level as he was at in broadcasting, and very much like yourself. You would never know that he wasn't just another fan there that you ran into at the bar and he bought you a beer. He was absolutely fantastic. So, quite a distinction. As I said, I mean, what awards haven't you won? And where does this one stack up? Or is it at the point now where you just toss the trophy into the case there and forget about it?
I was enormously humbled by this. And he was exactly, actually, Defo, you have this too. He was a professional. He had humility. He had a great sense of humor. It was just kind of everything you'd want. I think it was David Halberstam who called for him for Sportscasters. He's our Babe Ruth.
Yeah, fantastic. Always entertaining. Worshipped the guy with the catbird seat, the late great Red Barber, who I had a chance to listen to as a kid. And he was part of a tremendous broadcasting team, including my all-time favorite baseball announcer, Mel Allen, which you might dispute since he was calling Yankee games. But I don't know that anybody could argue that he wasn't among the greats.
Kirk Gowdy.
Kurt Gowdy was tremendous also. And Kurt, of course, worked with my favorite color analyst of all time, Al DeRogatis.
That's true. We used to get Giant games coming into Boston. Everyone says, "Oh, you must have loved the Patriots your whole life." But the Patriots were these vagabonds.
Yes.
They played at Fenway, they played at BC, they played at Harvard. So a lot of people were Giant fans, and that was the Rosie Greer and Y.A. Tittle and Frank Gifford. So, well, your childhood. So they were fun, the Giants.
All right, let's go back, track back into history here and how it all got started. Myself, like every other kid that played sports, you're thinking, geez, I'd love to be a professional athlete. And short of that, I'd like to be involved in sports in some way. Always enjoyed. This was when journalism featured very colorful and artful writers in the sports section of a variety of newspapers, including the one that you started at, the Boston Globe, which had maybe the most illustrious staff at one time ever assembled. And you were a part of that. But and I know you're a great athlete because after those bloodbaths we used to have at Broken Sound on the clay courts, I remember you were pissed off at me that you felt you lost on a bad call, and then we go back to your place to get something to drink, and you say, "You know what? I bet you can't swim." And we jumped in the pool, and you wanted to have a race, and I fell right to the bottom like Joe Frazier in the Superstars competition, and you look like freaking Katie Ledecky. I mean,
Used to serve. Well, you were a pitcher, right, in college?
yeah, yeah.
That ridiculous cutter serve that nobody could get near. But I will tell you, I hate to invoke the evil empire as a born, bred, and bled Red Sox fan. But the Boston Globe staff, when I started there, we were the 27 Yankees, not because of me, but it was Peter Gammons on baseball, Bob Ryan on basketball, Bud Collins, who taught America how to watch tennis, Will McDonough on football. So when CBS came to offer me a job, I was like, why would I leave the Globe?
So what was the motivation? You must have, participated in sports on different levels in school. And how did you? I was reading. I don't know. You never know what to believe on Wikipedia, but said that your incentive was always to be a sports writer, and you approached a lot of people about it, and they said, "Yeah, women don't write sports. What are you talking about? You can't do this." But that your parents were encouraging and said, "Yeah, you can do whatever you want." So, how did that spark ignite, and how were you able to follow up on it?
Well, thanks for asking that. I was a child who just loved sports the way other kids love music or poetry. I mean, you love music your whole time. You were like, weren't you? No, Ringo Starr would be your contemporary, right? So Gene Krupa, was that your idol? Probably.
I was a big Buddy Rich fan. I thought Buddy Rich was amazing.
Okay, not to be confused. So I was just one of those kids, and I started going to Fenway. My older brother Chris, you know him, we'd go to Fenway. I mean, I learned to score 6-4 to 3, the double play, as soon as I was probably 8 years old. And I really love sports. And my family moved around a lot. We were living in Cincinnati, I think. And my mom said, "Well, what do you think you want to do when you grow up?" And I was like 10. And I said, "I want to be a sports writer." And of course, the job didn't exist for women. It didn't exist for women until I started. So my mom, instead of saying, "Oh, you can't do that, girls don't do that," she said, "That's great. Sometimes you have to cross when it says don't walk."
Brilliant advice. Now, what kind of barriers? There had to be many, and I would imagine, especially, I was interviewing Lisa Guerrero, who became a sideline reporter in the National Football League after being a cheerleader with the Rams, and her career evolved. And she said she almost became. I guess you don't almost become suicidal. She had such grief from being attacked on social media. Those kind of things weren't out there now, where everybody's got something disparaging to say, but what kind of barriers did you face? Because, of course, we saw different battles at the time, and these seemed to be very imposing about women going into locker rooms to cover games. What were some of the things that you had to deal with, and how were you able to deal with them without feeling oppressed or having an inclination to maybe say, "Hey, maybe I should do something else"?
Uh, I think my passion outweighed the hurdles. I mean, I really wanted to cover sports. I never thought of television. Television when we were kids was a Walter Cronkite, Huntley Brinkley. It wasn't us. So I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm writing for the Boston Globe. I went on a Carnegie Foundation grant, and I just never complained. I mean, of course, the locker rooms weren't open when I started, so I did all the interviews in the parking lot. And John Madden used to say I was caught in a two-way go, which, is the defensive back has to choose. He's by himself back there. And should I go with this receiver, or there's a slot guy coming over? And so I would say, okay, do I have to talk to Terry Bradshaw, who won the game, or do I go talk to Steve Grogan because I was covering the Patriots for the Globe? So it was a lot to handle. There wasn't social media, but there wasn't access. So that made it pretty difficult. And of course, there weren't ladies' rooms. So I always tell all the young women, like last night this gave me such joy, pride. Last night I had 30 women in sports come to the Vin Scully, and that's how it's just blossomed and grown. And these are my friends, and I've loved that they've had an opportunity to have these careers. But yeah, I used to have to, Patriots would have the ball 1st and 10 on their own 20. I'm 22 years old, right, covering the Patriots for the Boston Globe. And I'd say to myself, can I get down the press elevator, across to the one public restroom, get back and get up before they punt, which they were gold standard Patriots in those days. It was the mid 70s. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, the one thing, as you know, I became really great friends with John Madden. I rode his bus with him for years. And the one thing we could never talk about was the 76 wild card game when the Patriots played the Raiders. And there was a terrible Ben Dreith call, roughing the passer on Sugar Bear Hamilton, who also he's a friend of yours, on Stabler. But Madden, of course, that was the year they won the Super Bowl. So I could never bring that up all the years I knew him.
The reception that you receive from players, I mean, players can be irascible, they can be indifferent, they can be outright rude. What kind of reception did you get as the first female to be in these positions?
I had a couple of areas of great support. The people at the Globe, they were all so confident there wasn't any jockeying, or jealousy or anything. So they were great to me. And actually, I got the job because the great Will McDonough called up Billy Sullivan, who then owned the team. And Billy was from Will was from Southie. Matter of fact, we're pretty sure Whitey Bulger was in disguise in the back. Oh, seriously, because his brother Billy Bulger was the president of the Massachusetts Senate, and he was one of Will's friends, one of the pallbearers. And we're sure that Whitey was in the back in disguise. I mean, Will had gone to see him in Leavenworth. They're such characters. So Will had called up Billy Sullivan. This was 1975, and he said, "Hey, Southie out the side of his mouth. Hey, we're going to have a woman on the beat, and that's that." Click. So
You,
that's
you,
but
you, Your brother has a wild story about when he was bartending and used to serve Whitey Bulger, and
Right.
he had to learn very quickly how to make a drink the same way.
And not charge them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I can just say this, but the best players to me were the African American, were the black players. I used to go over Sugar Bear Hamilton and Tony. Who else? There were like four defensive players. I'd go over and watch, and they would hang the sheet and run the 8 millimeter film and show me the defenses, or else on the wall. And one time I said, how come you guys are so good to me? And Sugar Bear said, because we know what it's like to be the only one.
Makes perfect sense. Yes, I mean they dealt with that kind of suppression also, and weren't exactly widely accepted. And then in Boston, which the great late Bill Russell, who we lost a couple of years ago, came out in his book and talked about the what he saw was blatant racism that was there. So that would make it even more identifiable for somebody that was trying to fight stereotypes and things of that nature and work their way and carve out a career in sports. My favorite thing that you said about that, though, was that you pioneered so many different things for women in the sporting journalism field that they should just give you a coonskin cap.
That's what Dick Stockton told me. By the way, when Dick Stockton and I got married, both Bill Russell and Red Auerbach came to our wedding. So you think anybody cared that Dick Stockton and Lesley Visser were getting married? No, it was like, oh my God, there's Bill Russell at the shrimp bowl. That's all anybody cared about. But yeah, Bill would talk about, it was quite a different time. And Boston is geographically divided. Back then the North End was separate from Roxbury, separate from the Back Bay. So, it's much more multicultural now, but back then it was pretty divided. So, but you know what? One time our friend Dan Shaughnessy reminded me, can you imagine growing up? Oh no, you couldn't even imagine this with your Knicks. But when I was growing up, the Celtics did not lose the NBA championship until I was in high school.
Really? And I was hoping Butch Comives could shoot 33% from the floor.
Oh, you guys act like those two stupid championships equal somehow. What do the Celtics have now? 25? I don't know. 18.
Yeah, but that one team with Bill Bradley and Earl of Pearl Monroe, my all-time favorite player for making adjustments and kind of toning down his own game and his own brilliance to fit in with the concept of a team. And he talks about it openly now and is still very vocal and does a lot of interviews. But the symmetry and the chemistry of that team was everything that we were looking for. It's kind of the way they're talking about the difference in watching men's basketball and the WNBA now, which has emerged, which also has to make you extremely happy to see that having some traction and getting the kind of attention that it's
No,
getting.
no. Before we get there, we have to go back. When you said that one team, I was sure that you were going to say Russell, Havlicek, the Jones boys. I mean, what do you mean? All right, one team. You had one team, and it was a great team. But please, that was 70 years ago. Same.
Well, that was true of my Jets also. Our last big game was in 1969, which
Who still goes down? Let's go over the Jets. Wouldn't you say that Weeb is still the number one coach in the history of the Jets?
and Joe Willie, the number one player, no question.
Well, who else? Okay, then you had Parcells. He was good, short but good, right? And
Yep.
and
We had Belichick for a day.
right, and Sexy Rexy got you to the AFC, right? A couple times.
Yes. Rich
Okay.
Kotite. I mean, you're not going to mention Rich Kotite in the greats of all time that coached the New York Jets?
No, you think that because he sparred against Ali and had a plate in his head. He did. Okay.
No comparison. I have to admit this that I had a very soft spot in my heart for the Boston Celtics because you had to find somebody that was winning once in a while. But when I was a Knicks fan growing up in New York, and my favorite player of all time, I know yours was Sam Jones, and that's a great story as well. But I loved Hondo Hamilchik. He was my favorite. The low
Yes.
top black cons were a pair of shoes that I coveted. I finally got a pair. I think they were $8, and I wore them proudly, not realizing they were mostly designed for indoor basketball courts, and that you were going to wear out that fabulous tread within 3 weeks. And back then, $8 for a pair of sneakers was like buying some Air Jordans with his autograph on it, game worn.
Well,
So
he didn't care. I mean, a sixth man. He didn't care, right? And he
Yeah.
Red taught him, it's not who starts, it's who finishes. And look, you have had the Yankees. I'll give you that, and you do have Madison Ave. But I just I have
Though, I like to attach myself to losers. I dropped the Yankees as soon as the Mets came into existence in 1962, and they still remain my all-time favorite team. In fact, I was upset in reverse to most people's philosophies that the White Sox only won 39 stinking games this year and took my Mets out of the record book as being the worst team in baseball history at 40 and 120.
Well,
So
when you grew up, would you go from Brooklyn to Yankee Stadium, or you
oh
never?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's appropriate that we're doing this on Bleacher Brothers because we loved that. The 75-cent bleacher seat, that was a coveted ticket for a kid back then. And then when the Mets came into existence, a couple of years after that, I started working at Shea because I don't know if this was part of your incentive to get into sports, but I just wanted to get into games for free. So I found any way I could do it, and I started selling souvenirs at Shea when I was 14. But prior to that, they played at the Polo Grounds, and we used to cut. My mother, she went to her grave still mad at me because Borden's was a brand of milk that was popular. I don't know if it was around in Boston, but it was big in the Northeast
Was
and in
that
New York
close to the
especially.
cow or something?
Well, they offered a coupon on the back of the Borden's cartons, and you had to accumulate 10 of these, and it entitled you to a free ticket to the deep nosebleed section. I mean, you were swallowing moss as you were hanging from the rafters there. And my mother used to get mad because we only had like five from the cartons of milk that were consumed. And so every time she would buy a carton of milk, even though it still had milk in it, we would either pour it out or just cut the coupon out. So yeah, we would do anything to get to a ball game, and that was part of my incentive for getting into sports writing first, and then of course broadcasting.
Well,
All
when
right, so
you were Yankees, are you the was it Maris and Mantle, or are you the Bobby Mercer days?
well, when I was a Yankee fan as a kid, it was Maris and Mantle and 1961, of course, one of my favorite seasons because I was a Maris fan and almost everybody else was a fan of the Mick.
Yes.
And Roger Maris wasn't really the most popular player. He was another gift from Charlie Finley and the Kansas City A's. I think the Yankees might have shipped this is one of the all time great names, Joe DeMaestri, to Kansas City to get Roger Maris, who became a two-time MVP and of course, set the home run record that year. Mantle and Maris, you'll remember this in that season, they were in a battle very much like McGuire and Sosa were
Sure.
to
Absolutely.
break the record. And Mantle got injured late in the season and missed the last couple of weeks. And then Maris went on to do it. And there were like 20,000 people at the ballpark that day. It was not recognized even by the Yankee fans as the kind of accomplishment that it was because it took 37 years and a lot of steroids. It took Victor Conti to help somebody eventually break the record. What was the evolution like, though? I mean, you're at the Boston Globe. I know you got the call to do TV. What was not Will McDonough also influential in you going ahead and feeling confident that that was going to work out well?
Yeah, the Globe. I mean, it used to be that you really didn't want to be a television person if you did sports. We didn't have I didn't know enough about it then. I just loved being a newspaper person. I mean, I was so happy. I'd go to the NBA finals with Bob Ryan. I go to Wimbledon and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Lesley Visser from the Boston Globe. I work with Bud Collins." And people who never spoke to anybody, Nastasi, Tiriak, they'd say, "What do you need?" I had the best job on the planet. But CBS came up to me and they'd had Phyllis George, who was a good friend of mine. And they said, "We had a woman who knew TV, but she didn't know sports. So we'd like to turn it around." And I said, "Well, why would I leave the Globe?" And Ted Shaker, who was the executive producer, came last night. He's just been so great with me and for me. And he said, "Because Leslie, at that time, there were only 20 of those jobs in America." And so I thought, okay, I'm going to flex a whole new set of muscles. I don't think you saw me in the very beginning. I look like I had rigor mortis. I mean,
Like I do now. Thanks.
no, it was crazy. But my very first CBS assignment was the iconic Laker Celtic final in '84. Are you kidding me? Still goes down as maybe the greatest. And I covered a lot of Celtics for the Globe. So I knew all the sports, but I knew nothing about television. And there was my debut on CBS Network, which, we had all the properties. Though in 1 year on CBS, I got to do the Olympics, the Final Four, the NBA Finals, the Super Bowl, and the World Series. It was nuts. And the World
Not a bad lineup. Yeah.
and the World Series was the great Blackjack Morris. Remember Minnesota? It was just brilliant. He went all 10 innings and didn't want to come out. So it was, yeah, it was fantastic.
All right, and then of course, many people remember you, and their first recollection of your work would be from Monday Night Football. How did that come about, and what was that experience like in the beginning? And as you mentioned, you became very tight with John Madden. And in fact, I remember watching the original Monday Night game. What was that? 1971, Cleveland Browns, New York Jets. A loss for the Jets, of course. They got tagged with a loss. I remember where I was. I was in a dormitory at Syracuse University. We were all amazed that there was a football game going on a Monday night. What were the thoughts at the time? Because this was an unusual departure. Now you have sports on 24 hours a day on a zillion different channels, but back then you were maybe getting one game a week in baseball and basketball. Did you think it was going to work? And what was it like becoming a part of the team?
Well, first of all, you're right about the first Monday Night Football. And the reason that came about was Roone Arledge wanted a game on Monday night, but nobody else wanted to touch it. So Art Modell, who you know was married to a Hollywood starlet, and he was a marketer. And so he said, yeah, we'll take a chance on it. That's how it came about, the Cleveland Jet game. And for me, it was that CBS lost football. You might remember, like all the years I traveled with John, I did the Madden Summerall games and I was on the NFL Today. That was always because we had the NFC package, which was huge. And you remember in those years, all the NFC East were great. It was the Giants, Philly, then Redskins, Dallas. So every week was, just a bonanza. And there weren't a lot of other networks, only 3 networks doing the NFL. So everything was a big game, and CBS always had the best games because the NFC was so strong then. And then in '93, we lost the NFL to Fox. That's when Fox came in. So most people went to Fox. Madden, Summerall, Dick Stockton, everybody, they all went to Fox. And ABC said, well, if you come to ABC, we'll make you the first woman to be on Monday Night Football. So it was a pretty easy decision. Plus, I got to do the Triple Crown with our buddy Dave Johnson. And
Yes.
I did every,
And down the stretch they come.
and he loved it. His first job, I think, was at Hialeah.
Yes, it was. They launched the careers of many great announcers. I know that Tom Durkin briefly was at Tampa Bay Downs, which was sort of an obscure low-level track at the time. It's since elevated itself and become more a part. I would say maybe second tier, but they do have some big events there and have launched some very prominent contending and championship horses. But he really kind of made his name at Hialeah Park. And then went on to a great fame, of course, as an announcer, maybe the best ever. I'm a big Dave Johnson fan. I met him at Santa Anita. Another one of those guys, like you were talking about with Vin Scully, that you meet him and he couldn't have been any more down to earth or humble in spite of his brilliance. And Dave Johnson, of course, went to New York. And my good friend now, who's calling at Saratoga, and also Santa Anita came out of Hialeah. I remember my friend Frank Miramonti, a schwitzing mess as he butchered the first race that he called at Hialeah Park. And he said to Forrest, well, what do you think about that? I was with him in the booth because I kind of helped him get going in another aspect of calling horse races. He was in some boiler room giving stretch calls on the score phone when that first came out. And he asked me, well, how did that sound? I said, you're going to have to pick it up a little bit.
Do you know whenever you say Santa Anita, you say it the way Trevor Denman would? That's how you always say.
Santa Anita, yeah, Santa Anita, exuding class, which Trevor Denman, and that was Miramonti's idol. He modeled a lot of his game after Trevor Denman, and does a dead-on impression of every race caller. Although that turned out to be a great talent, but also of relatively little use. Until I had just finished telling him that this is how off base I am. I had just finished telling Frank one day, hey, you've got this brilliant talent. You can do an impression of every race caller in the world, going all the way back in history. You mentioned Harry Henson out of Chicago, and he's like, there they go. Just pick it right up. And I thought, it's too bad you can't do anything with this talent. And that night, he gets a call from the producer of Seabiscuit. They needed somebody who could do all of the old-time announcers, and he ended up doing the voiceovers for a lot of the calls in Seabiscuit, but since has evolved to these great heights. But in doing Monday Night Football, The crew was then what was it, Madden, and who else was on the call? Because they've
John,
been trying forever to reenact what they had originally going with the chemistry, of course. And I guess it was Keith Jackson. Was he originally on the crew before Frank Gifford?
he was,
And
right?
then, of course, Howard Cosell and Dandy Don kind of made that whole thing go.
But no, mine was in the next glory years because John and Pat and everybody they were at Fox. So mine was Al Michaels, Frank Gifford, and Dan Deerdorf. So it was really fantastic. And Frank Gifford was like he was like an American James Bond. I mean, I did skiing around the world with him also, and skiing the mountain, the snow would get soft, in the early afternoon. So, like, we'd go, a bunch of us would go to a bar, and he would stand up, when a woman came in, he'd make sure your wine glass was filled. He was just a joy to work with, and Deerdorf so smart. I think Dan Deerdorf is the only guy who walked I'm sure he is the only guy who walked to his Hall of Fame induction because Dan was from Canton. And do you know at Michigan, either he hosted what guy or what guy hosted him at Michigan when he went on a recruiting trip?
Jim Mandich.
Yes,
Yes, Jim Mad Dog.
Jim the Mad Dog. So both of them were from Ohio. Of course, Jim from Solon, Ohio, and they both wanted to play for Woody, but Woody didn't recruit them, so they both went to play for Bo. But it was, it was they were, and Al Michaels is just a genius. I did all those triple crowns with him, and it was interesting that 3 straight years, I think it was 3 straight at ABC with Dave Johnson, the great Charles C. Canty, and Al Michaels, we had triple crown contenders. It was uh, Real Quiet. No, before that was what was the Baffert horse before that? Um, like Silent. Oh gosh, I'll think of it in a second. Um,
Sunday Silence.
no,
Oh, that
no,
wasn't a Baffert horse.
no. It was. I'll think of it in a second. But one of them got beat by Victory Gallop, and then we had Charismatic was the third. So began with an S, the first one. So it was that horse that I think got beat by or Touch Gold maybe, and the next one, Real Quiet, maybe got beat by Victory Gallop. I'm not sure. And then Charismatic, of course, broke down. So it was really, but unbelievable that we had horses who'd won the Derby and the Preakness going for the Triple Crown. So it was really an exciting time to do racing.
Two of my favorite sports, as you know, boxing and horse racing, happen to be two sports that I loved covering. Did you not dabble in a little bit of boxing at one time also? Did you get assigned to a boxing match by the Globe?
I actually did a couple of them. One you'll really laugh because you'll totally get it. Yeah, they sent me to do Mustafa Hamsho, who was fighting Hagler.
Yes.
And so what did I know? And they said, well, just go down to Philly and do a feature on him. So it was the famous, what is that, Fifth Street Gym? What's the famous in Philly?
In
They,
Philadelphia. Well, I mean, yeah, it might have been Joe Frazier's gym there.
yeah. So, so I go and I loved it, right? All the peeling, the paint and the old posters. And
Oh, yeah, it's great.
so all he said was, I think he was half terrified because he said people who get hit by Hagler say that all of a sudden they feel like their neck is 9 feet long and they're looking down at their shoes. So I think so. Anyway, but that, and then we did one when CBS had a racing series. One of them was at Atlantic City, but it was a terrible race and nobody went to it. And so we put on a boxing match in the inner ring. So a boxing match, Jim Cotton, I did it. A boxing match was going on while there was also the race.
And one of the reasons that I love both of those sports, and it's still true today, is a the characters and the real slice of life stuff that you would get into going into these dingy boxing gyms. It was amazing. You'd see first class world champions, and they're rolling in there, and there was always that guy named Smitty in the corner or Whitey, and he would break out a picture of him when he fought Sugar Ray Robinson and say, "Yeah, that was me," and he was with the spit bucket. So you had nothing but characters there, but you could get close to these guys. You've had a knack of doing this your whole life, but it was a sport that was very open to coverage and very receptive to people. That whether you were saying good things or bad, that they were very receptive to having the media around and the press around. As Angelo Dundee told me many times, we need you guys. So he was always very grateful when people were covering the sport. But it was terrific in the aspect, and I always loved it for this, that you could really get close to the people, and they couldn't have been any more Damon Runyon types. I mean, they're real characters in both sports.
Well, you were the only person I've ever met who went to Barranquilla, or what is that?
Barranquilla, Colombia, yes. Their guy won and a riot broke out. I'll never forget that. I got hit with a couple of beer cans in the back of the head. I was ringside. And again, referencing the great Jimmy Lennon Sr., he gave me one of my terrific pieces of advice that I received. And I'm sure you've received a lot of different things and doled out a lot of good advice. But he said, Jeff, the minute you hear me say, ladies and gentlemen, we have a split. As soon as he said the word split before decision, he said, that's when you want to duck under the ring apron.
You ever get blood on you? I always wondered if rings.
Yes, I did. In fact, the fight doctor who first time I called a fight on TV was with the great late fight doctor, Freddie Pacheco, a real character and a Renaissance man type. He did art, he did writing and all kinds of stuff. Of course, was with Ali all of those years. And I had a soda. And it was right. We were sitting on the ring apron there, and he puts a program over it. I said, Freddie, what are you doing? I'm going to drink that. He says, AIDS is going around and blood is going to be flying. So, yeah, I've ended up with blood splattered, not splattered, but drops of blood on my shirt when I was calling boxing. And it's especially becoming when you're wearing a tuxedo. In fact, I think when we went to your wedding to the Duke,
Yeah,
there might have been a blood stain on my shirt.
indeed. And you and Kyle were changing the top in the men's room. But you know what I remember is, they're so larger than life, no matter what size they are. And Jake LaMotta actually lived. Dick Stockton and I lived on Sutton Place, and that's where Jake LaMotta lived. And he was like 90 years old then. And so one time he came around the corner, and you know this. Actually, John Madden taught me this because John loved the fight game, and we used to go to Vegas on our way to a 49er game. And he said, you just call everybody champ, right? Doesn't matter who.
That's right, exactly.
But
Hey, champ, how you feeling?
champ. So, but of course, LaMotta was a great champ. So he's coming along. By then, he was like 5'8", and he's coming around the corner. And I said to Dick, I said, "Hey, Dick, if he's untoward with me, if he flirts with me, you could handle it, couldn't you?" And Dick said, "Are you kidding? He'd flatten me, swish his wrist."
He was still tough when he used to be in a wheelchair in his latter days, and he was rolling around Gulfstream Park, and was a very prominent figure there for many, many years. There was always this kind of interplay between boxing and horse racing. The fans seemed to like both sports. So some of the characters that you've met, though, and I guess we could kind of distinguish these by sport. In horse racing, though, well, who were some of your favorites that you came across in the Triple Crown series?
Well, I think the guy I got the closest to, and I'm really glad I did because he's up there with all of the greats, was Wayne Lucas. And
Yes.
Wayne, he was the first to ship horses, right? D. Wayne off the plane. And it was really a privilege. I remember I had to go out and do a story on him in Santa Anita. And so he said, well, let's go for a ride. I've been on a horse, at the carousel at Saratoga, right? And I remember we saw Angel Cordero, and Wayne pointed at me and said to Angel, right where I want to have a sports writer. Like I'm hanging on the horses and I'm terrified. But he was really interesting because, as you know, he'd been a basketball coach, and I think I've covered about 35 Final Fours. And he worked with Johnny Orr, the great basketball player, or basketball coach Johnny Orr. So I thought he was just really interesting, and the way his mind works. I mean, you saw his barns; they were pristine. He brought flowers. He made the barn as attractive as the sport as the Derby.
And still going strongly. Still a factor in Triple Crown races. Usually has an entry in the Kentucky Derby, and still winning races at what must be close to 90 years old.
Yeah, 89. I just heard from him the other day, and it was a picture of him. He sent me a picture of him in the rain on the backstretch. It's like pitch black except for the lights on the backstretch, pouring rain, and there he is up on his giant Appaloosa or whatever he rides around. But he was, and you were there a million times yourself at the Derby. He'd sit on that horse and lecture us. I mean, he was the ultimate Sermon on the Mount.
And I'm glad first time we went to the Derby, that I helped you ignite a romance. Because you were so pissed off at me that I was obsessed with betting the simulcast, and I was trying to break into the Gold Room, which was the only place that they had racing being piped in from other tracks, which I, naturally being a screen-to-screen better, I had to have it. And with the addiction, I was getting the shakes, waiting 25, 30 minutes between races. And you stormed off and ended up in the box with Rick Pitino, who, of course, is a huge presence in Louisville and a big horse racing guy. In fact, he was one of the advocates of the whole concept of how do you make a small fortune in horse racing? You start with a large fortune. and,
I will tell you, and that is so true. I was so furious at you, Defo. First of all, I mean, it's the Kentucky Derby, act like you've been there before, which you had. So, okay, we're up in the press room, which then were the greatest seats in all of sports, right?
yes. Oh, it's fantastic.
Writers, it's right on the finish. So then I went in to say hello to Kyle, your buddy, who somehow was in that $1 million room. I have no idea.
Even though he had a sleeveless shirt, they had cut off the sleeves on and looked like a slob.
Yeah, but the worst part was, remember, we were sitting with Calvin Burrell's agent and we just
Yes.
ignored him, right? Okay. But all of a sudden, Victoria, a lovely lady who had worked that room for maybe 15 years, comes over to me and says, do you know that man at the door? I look over. There is your nose pushed up against the glass, trying to see Tampa down, something else, right? I have no idea. Ex-Arbin, I don't know what you were doing. And I said, Victoria, if you could just let him in, I will never, ever ask you for anything else in my entire life. And so she opened the door and I went out and you came in. And that's the last that I spoke to you for about 5 years. But
Well, and you go up to Patino's box, and then you ran into, of course, the Duke,
the
as he
Duke,
was known, Bob Knuth, who was a former Harvard basketball team captain,
I
and happened to have quite a great lifestyle going for himself as well, and the rest is the stuff of which legends are made, as it
well,
developed into a very nice
um,
romance and friendship.
great guy. We had a little bit of a rough start in the very beginning because Rick, who I go all the way back to when he was at Boston University, I was Rick's beat writer. So, I covered all 7 of his Final Fours, one of my very closest friends. And Rick said, hey, Lesley, I'd like you to meet my friend, Bob Knuth. He was the captain of basketball at Harvard. And I said, well, I don't think so, since I covered Harvard at the Globe and I've covered all these NCAA tournaments. So, I really don't think so. And the first thing Bob Knuth ever said to me was, you must have missed 4 years.
This is great too, and a nice segue into and sideline reporting too is not the easiest thing. I've done it a few times, and now you get the obligatory couple of questions, and the answers are nondescript, and yet, and this was how you applied your art and separated yourself from the ordinary reporter or the person that's just going to go with the standards. And it was especially in evidence. I'll never forget. And I love this story about you and Jimmy Calhoun, who could be, I don't know, that he wasn't really abrasive, but wasn't necessarily a guy that you're thinking, wow, he's very approachable. And
Well,
he was losing at the time at halftime of an NCAA tournament game in the Final Four. And you had to ask him a couple of questions at halftime, and I'll let you tell the story.
Well, he was most prickly with him. By the way, I'd known him forever. He, coached at Northeastern before he went to Connecticut, and he was a Boston guy, tough, tough Boston guy. And so I'd known him forever. And no, the worst was when they were the defending champion. Maybe this was 2011. I don't know what year they won their first one. By the way, Jim Calhoun does not get enough credit. He built a dynasty out of the desert. I mean, really, what was Storrs, Connecticut? But they were the number 1 seed because they were the defending champion. They had, remember Kemba Walker? They had that.
Yes.
So,
I think we bet him every game in the tournament that year.
I mean, and he was a brilliant coach. They had a great team. So they lost in the first round the next year. And the losing coach does not have to speak to CBS. The winning does, but not the losing. But Jim said, what the heck? I've known her a million years. I'll talk to her. So I put on, my sad face, and I say, Jim, tough game. And he looks at me and now he's like 2 inches from my nose and he's spitting on me. And he said, well, nobody died. I look like the jerk. So really, it was so embarrassing. Thank you for bringing it up. It was so embarrassing. And it was just like, I didn't know. And Vern Lundquist had to say on there, well, they're really good friends. But he was just letting off steam, I think. But I think college basketball coaches are the most interesting of all the people that I'd run into because a lot of them are urban guys. You had all those great East Coast coaches. And when I started covering the Big East, the day the Big East started in '79, and you had, what'd you have, 4 Italians, maybe? You had Carnes,
Valvano was part of it.
Rolly
No,
Dunn,
he was ACC.
Yeah, no, it was Rowley, Dom Perno, Patino. Well, he came in a year later, but Patino. Dom Perno was the coach when the Big East started at Connecticut. So you had all these. Oh, and they called John Thompson the honorary Paisan. So it was like so much fun because those guys were all close. Bayheim, they'd go on golfing trips together in Ireland. Matter of fact, Bill Raftery, who was then at Seton Hall, he said one time, you'll get this, one time he borrowed, they were in Ireland, and Raph said one time he borrowed Bayheim's shoes and they whined all the way up the hill.
They're fascinating people. They talk about Sean McVay. We've seen evidence where he remembers the detail of every play call, even if you go back to some obscure game from 20 years ago. And we get this with our good friend Jim Larinaga, who I know you're very close to also. A fascinating guy and brilliant basketball resume, now with the University of Miami. And you could ask him about something that happened when he was a high school player. He remembers every detail of it. And I remember being at a Final Four Radio Row. It was not as elaborate as the Super Bowl Radio Rows, but kind of a modest, compromised version of that in terms of number of people. And they made all of these basketball coaches available to you, some of whom I wasn't as familiar with as others. And I could not believe, I was fascinated by their total recall of everything that ever happened to them, every detail of every game. That was great. Who was the guy, though, that fired back at you? Or you came back during an interview during a Final Four, and the coach said something about the changes they were making. It was kind of as we said, not necessarily a really direct answer. And I think you said to him, "So how's that working out for you?" As he was losing the games.
No, the one you're thinking of, which I'll tell you about in a second, but no, that was Jim Mora when they'd lost
Oh,
like
okay,
yeah,
yeah.
they lost like 5 games in a row, and he said, "Well, we're taking it one day at a time." And I knew him well enough, and I said, "How's that working out for you?" And he said, "Not that great." He was a good man. But the one, was the famous Bobby Knight one where
Oh, yeah.
that was a regional final. They beat Temple. So I ask, how were you able to defeat Temple? And he gives me we scored more points than you did. That may be something you in the media missed that when the buzzer blows. And I went, yeah, 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 yeah. And we were great friends from then on.
I'll never forget too, and a couple of coaches that we got to interview together on the radio. You turned me on to being a Coach K fan. I was not a big Coach K fan because I'm not a big Duke fan. And you arranged an interview with him on the radio on this rinky-dink station we were working at, 640. And so here's Coach K coming on this very undistinguished radio station, naturally because of your presence there. And he just won the Olympics. And the way that he spoke about this, I mean, it was almost Pat Riley esque. You couldn't help but think, wow, this guy really loves the freaking game. And it was fantastic. But I'll also never forget when you dragged Bob Huggins out of bed early in the morning for a morning show.
Over.
And you may as well have dragged Miller Huggins out of the grave because I remember his first response was along the lines you said, "Hey, we did this upbeat intro and we're doing morning drive radio." And you're like, "And it's great to welcome the great coach of West Virginia, Bob Huggins." And he goes, "Yeah."
Yeah, he wasn't a morning person, but I will tell you, in all my years, and I've been, all the practices, Rick Pitino runs the best practice. People should have to pay to go to it. He's just genius. But Mike Krzyzewski, who I'm very close to now, I was on the V Foundation board with him for more than 20 years. And he didn't just love the game, he loved America. He grew up Polish section, Northwest Chicago, and he wanted to go to Creighton and be a shooter. That's what he wanted to do. But when West Point, they called about an appointment, and his parents, Polish immigrants, they said, "Are you kidding? You have a chance to go to West Point. That's where presidents go. That's where you're going to go." And of course, he played for Bob Knight. He never got to shoot, right? It was all defense. He was so proud. The ring that he wore, like if you asked him what's one ring that you want to wear, it wouldn't be his Hall of Fame. It wouldn't be every Duke championship. It would be the Olympic ring. He was so proud to win that for America.
People are really into surveys these days, and they're always trying to quantify who was the greatest of all time. Is it really possible to do that as you span the different eras? It seems like a futile endeavor. I mean, you can drop a few names in and probably put an umbrella over a lot of people. But are there? You named a few of your favorite college basketball coaches. Who would you put in that category if you had to single somebody out? Is it possible to do?
Well, a couple things. One, I think anyone who was great of his era. I mean, I think Bob Cousy would be great today. Anyone who was great when they were great, Michael Jordan would be great today. You have lots of players who, if they were great in their time, I mean, Bill Russell's the winningest champion we have in this country, right? He won 11 Celtic titles, back to back San Francisco titles, and Olympic. So people would find a way to be great. So I do think you can have a Mount Rushmore. And I'd say for basketball coaches, you have to have John Wooden. You'd have to have Mike Krzyzewski. I mean, I'd have Rick Pitino. Other people might have Bill Self or Dean Smith. But I do think you can, because I know that great is great. And if they move forward, they'd have better training, they'd eat better, and they'd be great.
All right, and the versatility in your career is incredible, including what, 3 summer and 3 winter Olympics, and you had quite an experience at both of those in both of those endeavors, including did you not end up on like the Jamaican bobsled team one year?
Well, they were in it. It was the games in Albertville, France. Matter of fact, can you see the bobsled helmet right there?
Yep.
I was the first. Jean Claude Killy gave me that. He was the president of the games, and I was the first woman ever to go down the Olympic bobsled. One of my, I guess, illustrious firsts. And it was because Herschel Walker was on that team. People might remember they would always get Speed to be the pusher in the 4-man bob. So Herschel said, "Well, why don't you come down the track with us?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." Well, that Bob Seger song, I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. It was insane, Defo. It's just a tin can rattling down sheer ice at more than 100 miles an hour. And, I weigh 125 pounds and I'm banging on both sides. And Sean McDonough was on the call, who can do any sport. As you know, he's a giant. He can do anything. And all you heard, CBS put it on, and all you heard was, "Oh, oh, keep your head down. Oh." So yeah, that was pretty wild and it was interesting because Prince Albert was in those games. Monaco had a bobsled team, and so you're spending a month in the mountains with these people, whatever your venue is, and he just went around calling himself Al Grimaldi, like he wanted nothing to do with Prince Albert.
You would be more likely, I would think, to find him at a polo match somewhere in the summertime in Wellington than running around in the mountains on a bobsled team. And you also did a lot of figure skating, though, which was a prominent part, of course, of the television coverage of the Olympics, the Winter Olympics. Big attraction, figure skating. We had many tremendous competitors. And did you work with the great Dick Button on any of these Olympic telecasts? Because among color analysts, Al DeRogatis, of course, in football, my all-time favorite. But I don't know that anybody brought you into the sport more than Dick Button did when he was doing the telecast and the broadcast of any type of figure skating event.
I feel like I've had a Mount Rushmore of announcers. I mean, I did work with Dick Button. I'll tell you that story in a second. I work with Al Michaels. I work with Pat Summerall. I work with John Madden. I work with Dick Enberg. I mean, I really feel there isn't a great, now we love Iron Eagle, and there's some terrific ones. And Jim Nance, of course, does everything at a very high level. So I feel like I really know, and Dick Stockton, he's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. So I do feel like I really know announcers and what it takes. And, everybody does his own board himself. I mean, all the greats do it every week. They get out the board and they do every player and notes on the player. But Dick Button was not a fan of mine in the beginning because, well, first of all, Dick Button has the greatest one-sentence resume that I've ever heard. He was 5-time world champion, 2-time Olympic champion, Harvard and Harvard Law School. So he pretty much was the smartest guy in
Yeah,
the room.
no doubt. But the way he said a triple cell cow.
Oh yeah, wasn't saying, "Oh, that line in her back is dreadful," right? So he
He
thought,
would have been great on Dancing with the Stars. He could have been the original Len Goodman, this guy.
fabulous. But he thought I was that thug, coming over from football and basketball and baseball. Like, what was I doing on figure skating? ABC assigned me to all the, world championships. So I went around the world with him, and he did not speak to me for like the first 8 months. And finally, we were at a production meeting. We were in Nice. The world championships were in Nice. And I thought, okay, I've been on the air with the guy now for 8 months. I can venture a comment about Tara Lipinski or something. So I venture my first skating comment at the production meeting, and Dick Button turns and arches his back and looks at me and says, "Oh, that's hardly relevant." I said, "You'll grow to love me." It was a scream. I'm not kidding. My career's been a riot.
It's tremendous, encyclopedic in terms of the different sports that you've covered and all of the different events. All right, we've been going for a while here. We have to mention a few things. Well, one of my favorite things, you've introduced me to a lot of great people, and you mentioned this gentleman earlier, and he was part of one of my favorite ever responses from an athlete. The Great Bud Collins, who had a little Haywood Hale and Bruin in him. He had a little Jack Whitaker in him, and he was very much his own man, and well loved and well respected by everybody. I'll never forget when Chris Everett had suffered a very difficult loss to just a tough competitive 3-set match against Martina at the height of their rivalry, and she's walking off the court. Bud was there in the runway to the locker room, and he gets the one question in with Chris, and he asked her how she felt, and she was very depressed about it. And after she seemed to be just really down, she looks back as she's walking away and says, "Nice pants, Bud."
Well,
But he was a classic. I mean, one of those guys, and I don't know that you see that level of individualism anymore. That's brought off in such a subtle and discreet way in sportscasting now. Seems like everybody's inclined to embrace screaming and yelling and stuff that would get you, dismissed from the job immediately, by the society out there that's ready to attack everybody for being politically incorrect. But yeah, that guy was a classic in and of himself, and should be talked about more among the greats of broadcasters.
definitely he's the Mount Rushmore guy. I got to cover probably about 9 or 10 Wimbledons with him, quite a few U.S. Opens also. And people would line up like taking a ticket at the bakery because Bub was so generous. His parents were missionaries in Thailand. I mean, he came from a really giving family. Went to Baldwin Wallace in Ohio, and just a giant of a man, huge heart. And so people on deadline would just line up, and we'd be typing there. And they had 5 American writers. They called us the Colonials. This was in the 70s, and Bud would be typing, and people would come along. Bud, who's the last Romanian female quarterfinalist? And Bud would be typing and say, Virginia Rosic. And then I think but he got one. I know it sounds like the 1800s, but we used to send our copy by Western Union then. And
Yes.
we're very prim ladies, as you'd imagine, sending the copy. And this is when, of course, the McEnroe, Bjorn Borg, and Connors also Borg. And so Bud wrote once that all these teenage girls, right? He called him, Bjorn the teenage angel. So he wrote that all these girls went into squeals of Borgasms, and Western Union, those prim ladies would not send it. This is not going over our cable.
I used to when I first was doing sports writing. They didn't have the video display terminal. That was like a giant advancement in technology when it first came out. You could actually send the story and type it in the press box. And I used to have to pick up a payphone, and call a guy, and then dictate the story that you had written down on some pad somewhere. And you'd be sitting there going, and then he threw a jab.
And hope they put
That's
the font.
JAB. Yes.
No, it was, I mean, the technology is so wild. Yeah, when I started, we all had the Royal typewriter, and you either send it over like a fax machine. That was one thing, or you dictated it. And then the next thing was the porta-bubble, which I still have. I tried to kill John Feinstein once, but he got saved with his porta-bubble. But those are those big machines. You put the phone in the top of it.
Yeah.
So, John, there's only so much of Feinstein you can take. So we were doing a Michigan Notre Dame game up at the big house. And I said, I can't take it anymore. And I tried to run John Feinstein over with my rent-a-car, but he put the porta bubble in front to save his life.
Destroy a piece of equipment to save his own life. By the way, John Feinstein is going to be our guest on
Of
next
course,
week's show.
of
So
course.
you just validated the story that he'll probably tell at the top of the
No, he
program, that
knows.
you did try to mow him down with your car.
It was the rent-a-car.
This has flown by. Only about a minute left, and a zillion things to get to. But I know you wanted to touch on the passing of one of the all-time greats, El Tiante, Louis Tiant, who we just keep losing one monumental sports figure after another, and passed away at 83. What are your recollections of Louis?
Well, first, as a child, people forget that in '68, I think, what did he go, 21, and he had a massive record that year, 21 and 7 or something. I mean, and his ERA was like 1.3. He was Gibson-esque. And people forget the '68. Of course, he battled for 8 innings in the sixth game of the '75 World Series, probably the greatest game ever played. And he really helped set the stage for Carlton Fisk's iconic home run. But then you were there when my closest personal moment, they asked me to throw out the first pitch when the Red Sox played the Marlins. And of course, it was down here. And El Tiante said to me, everybody, all the men try to muscle it, and they throw it down. That's why it hits the ground. He said, throw it high and let gravity take it in. And Mark Burley caught it, and it really did go just like El Tiante said, as opposed to who was it who was saying to me? Big Poppy was saying, "Don't bounce it, Lely. Lives on the internet." I'm not nervous enough. My childhood team.
Yeah, you don't want to end up like Carl Lewis in Infamy, where you look like Earl Anthony rolling the ball up the home plate. My one time having a chance to throw out a ceremonial first pitch was at a Marlin game in September. It was a prelude to they were 5 games back in the wild card to the Philadelphia Phillies at the time. People didn't really give them much of a chance of making the postseason at that stage. This sort of triggered their rush into the postseason, and of course, they went on to win the World Series that year. And I thought, wow, this is great. I'm going to be throwing a pitch to Pudge Rodriguez, who was behind the plate, warming up, the pitcher at the time. And all of a sudden, I come out there, and Pudge leaves, and I had to throw a fastball to Billy the Marlin, the mascot, who had a giant clown mitt. And I guess they thought that I had lost my ability to control the fastball
Wait,
over
before
the
you
years.
go, it was Silver Charm. Remember? That's
Silver Charm, yes, yes. Well, we could go on all day, and we haven't even scratched the surface of the many things that you've done. I keep thinking during the entire time that we're talking about one of my favorite songs and any jazz extrapolation. Maybe we can get it done one day by our good friend Mr. Bass, and we always thinking about our favorite things. Christian McBride, of course, great jazz bassist. We'll get him to do a rendition of it, but and it seems to me, I don't know that you could ever pinpoint what one of your favorite things were, or anything, to single out something that you've done during your career. But is there an ultimate moment that you experienced?
Yeah, mine was tangentially sports, but CBS sent me to cover the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was really profound. And the reason, of course, Dan Rather, all our people were there, but I had that one little slice of sports. Remember Katerina Witt? She was the beautiful face
Yes.
of socialism. And so I got to go through, the walls coming down, and I got to go through Checkpoint Charlie and into East Berlin because we interviewed her there. But it was just so profound to see those people walk from Potsdam and Dresden just to taste freedom.
Awesome stuff. And I hope people had a chance to, in honor of your being the recipient, first female recipient of the Vin Scully Award, I hope people had a chance to pull up a chair and stay a while for the conversation with Lesley Visser. Lesley, I can't thank you enough. Thanks so much for helping me launch the program.
Oh, I love you, Defo. Thank you. You're always fun.
All right. Lesley Visser, ladies and gentlemen, our first guest on Conversations. Next week, John Feinstein, right here on the next edition of Conversations with Jeff DeForest on the Bleacher Brothers.
I can't believe it's Feinstein. I'm hanging up now. Goodbye.